The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the dew when Eliza Hart spotted the first sign of trouble. 3 fence posts along the northern boundary of Hale Ranch had been cut clean through, not broken by weather or wandering cattle, but sliced deliberate as a surgeon's blade. She dismounted River, her gray mare, and ran gloved fingers along the smooth cut. The wood was still pale, not yet weathered. Fresh work, maybe 2 days old at most. She straightened, scanning the horizon where the grassland rolled away like a rumpled quilt, stitched here and there with mesquite and sage. River snorted, ears swiveling east. Eliza followed the mare's attention and saw it a dark smudge against the morning sky. Smoke, but not from any cook fire. This was grass smoke, thin and spreading. Easy, girl. She swung back into the saddle, her split skirt settling around her legs. 24 years of living had taught her that smoke on the prairie meant one of 2 things, accident or intention. Neither boded well. The Hale Ranch sprawled over 8,000 acres of decent grazing land, close enough to water that the cattle didn't walk themselves thin reaching it. Eliza had been managing the herd since spring, when Thomas Hale had finally stopped pretending he didn't need help and hired her on. She'd proven herself quickly could read the weather in the way the grass bent, spot sickness in a steer from 40 yards, and ride better than half the men who'd applied for the job. She urged River into a steady lope, following the fence line west. More cut posts. Whoever had done this had worked methodically, opening a gap wide enough to drive a herd through. The earth here was churned up, marked by unshod hoofprints heading northeast. Not cattle tracks, these were deeper, sharper, buffalo. Eliza's jaw tightened. Buffalo didn't normally range this far south anymore, not since the hide hunters had thinned them out. Someone had driven them here. Someone who knew that a buffalo stampede through Hale's cattle would scatter the herd to hell and back, maybe taking down a few cowboys in the process. She turned River toward the main house, needing to warn Thomas. The mare responded instantly, stretching into a ground-eating gallop. They'd covered maybe 2 miles when she saw him. Thomas Hale sat his black gelding near the eastern pasture, watching his son practice with a lasso. Even from a distance, she could see the careful way he held himself straight-backed but easy, like a man who'd learned that showing tension only spooked the stock. 38 years old, widowed 3 winters past. He ran his ranch with the same quiet certainty he'd once used to lead a cavalry unit. The war had left its marks on him, though he never spoke of it. She'd seen the scars. Young Caleb spotted her first, his 12-year-old voice carrying across the grass. "Pa, Miss Eliza's coming fast." Thomas turned, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle in his saddle scabbard before recognizing her. He rode out to meet her, Caleb trailing behind on his paint pony. "Fence is cut along the north boundary," she reported without preamble. "Buffalo tracks heading through. Someone's been burning grass to the east, likely to turn them our way." Thomas's gray eyes, the color of storm clouds over the prairie, narrowed. "How many?" "Hard to say. Ground's torn up bad. Could be 50, could be more." "Pa, can I ride with the hands to check?" Caleb's voice cracked with excitement. This was his first season working the ranch instead of staying at the house with his studies. "No." Thomas's tone brooked no argument. "You ride back to the house. Tell Miguel to ring the bell 3 times, then help him secure the barn." "But Pa..." "Now, Caleb!" The boy's shoulders slumped, but he turned his pony toward home. Eliza watched him go, something uneasy stirring in her chest. Her own brother Samuel had been about that age when... She cut off the thought. Sam was 2 years in the ground, killed in a dispute over water rights with hired guns from the railroad company. No use dwelling on what couldn't be changed. "I'll gather the hands." Thomas said, "We need to move the herd south before..." The ground trembled. It started as a faint vibration, like distant thunder, but grew quickly into a steady rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. River danced nervously, and Thomas's gelding snorted. They both turned northeast, and Eliza's heart sank. The buffalo appeared over the rise like a dark wave, their massive bodies moving with terrifying purpose. Dust rose in a choking cloud, and the rumble became a roar. There had to be hundreds of them, a sea of humped backs and curved horns, bearing down on the ranch's eastern pasture. And there, directly in their path, was Caleb. The boy had stopped to practice with his rope again, trying to snag a fence post. His pony stood broadside to the oncoming herd, maybe 300 yards from the leading edge of destruction. "Caleb!" Thomas's shout was swallowed by the thunder of hooves. Eliza didn't think. She leaned forward, gave River her head, and the mare exploded into motion. The gray horse ran like her namesake, swift, powerful, unstoppable. Eliza had bought her from a Kiowa trader who swore she had Windhorse blood. And in moments like this, she believed it. The distance closed with agonizing slowness. She could see Caleb now, his face white with terror as his pony crow-hopped and squealed. Too panicked to run, the boy sawed at the reins, making it worse. 100 yards, 50. The leaders of the buffalo herd were close enough that she could see the foam on their muzzles, smell the rank wildness of them. "Let go of the reins!" she shouted, praying her voice would carry. "Grab the saddle horn!" By miracle or instinct, Caleb obeyed. His pony immediately wheeled to flee, but too late the buffalo would overrun them in seconds. Eliza drew her Colt and fired twice into the air. The sharp cracks did nothing to turn the herd, but they gave her a marker for her own position. She angled River to intercept Caleb's path, leaning far out from the saddle. "Jump!" she commanded as they drew alongside. Caleb flung himself sideways. For a heart-stopping moment, he hung in the air between the two horses. Then Eliza's arm locked around his middle, hauling him across River's shoulders. The gray mare grunted at the sudden weight but never broke stride. They swept past the edge of the herd with barely 10 feet to spare. The wall of buffalo thundered by, close enough that Eliza felt the heat of their bodies, tasted the dust of their passage. Caleb's pony vanished into the chaos. She prayed it would find its way clear. She didn't slow until they reached a rise well out of the stampede's path. Only then did she ease River to a stop and help Caleb slide to the ground. The boy's legs gave out immediately. He sat in the dirt, shaking. Thomas arrived moments later, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. He dropped to his knees beside his son, pulling the boy against his chest. Over Caleb's head, his eyes met Eliza's. She saw everything in that look: terror, relief, gratitude too deep for words. "You hurt?" she asked Caleb, her voice steadier than her hands. The boy shook his head, face buried in his father's shirt. Thomas held him tighter. Movement below caught Eliza's eye. A lone rider approached from the direction of the buffalo herd, moving with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. As the figure drew closer, she saw it was a young native man, perhaps 18 or 19, riding bareback on a spotted horse. He wore a mix of traditional dress and trader cloth buckskin leggings, a cotton shirt, a buffalo hide vest decorated with beadwork. 3 eagle feathers hung from his long black hair. He stopped a respectful distance away and raised his right hand, palm out. In his left, he held a staff decorated with more feathers and strips of white cloth, a peace marker. "I am called Little Star in your tongue," he said, his English careful but clear. "Among my people, I am Kiona. I speak for those who seek harmony." His dark eyes moved from Eliza to Thomas, then settled on Caleb. "I saw what this woman did. I saw courage that honors the Earth Mother." Thomas stood slowly, keeping one hand on Caleb's shoulder. "State your business." Kiona's young face remained serene. "The buffalo were driven by those who burn without wisdom. My people tracked them, trying to turn the herd, but we were too few." He looked directly at Eliza. "Tomorrow at dawn, 150 of our Omega will come. We bring no war paint, only gratitude. You saved a child of this land from death caused by foolishness. This debt must be acknowledged." The Omega Eliza had heard the term. Among the Comanche, they were the peace talkers, the ones who calmed disputes and carried messages between bands. If 150 were coming, This was no small gesture. "We don't need," Thomas began, but Kiona raised his hand gently. "Honor is not about need. It is about balance." He touched his chest, then extended his hand toward them. "What is your name, woman who rides like the wind?" "Eliza Hart." "Eliza Hart." He repeated it carefully, as if tasting the sounds. "Tomorrow at dawn, we come with peace in our hands and debt in our hearts." Without waiting for response, he wheeled his horse and rode back the way he'd come, the peace staff held high. In the settling dust, with the buffalo herd now a distant rumble heading toward the empty plains, Eliza understood that everything was about to change. The cut fences, the driven herd, someone had orchestrated this, and tomorrow's dawn would bring either understanding or catastrophe. She looked at Thomas, still holding his son. "We need to prepare." He nodded slowly. "The town needs to know. If word spreads wrong." "I know." She'd seen what happened when fear overtook reason. "I'll tell it straight." As she mounted river and turned toward the ranch, she felt the weight of the morning's events settle across her shoulders like a yoke. Behind her, the prairie stretched endless and golden, holding its secrets close. Tomorrow, she thought, those secrets might finally spill into the light. The dust hung in the air like a shroud, turning the morning sun into a copper disk. Eliza's heart still hammered from the rescue as she watched the buffalo herd thunder away, their dark mass flowing over the grassland like spilled ink. River stood steady beneath her, sides heaving but calm. The mare had run her heart out and knew it. "There," Caleb pointed with a shaking hand. His paint pony emerged from a stand of mesquite, reins tangling in the brush but otherwise unharmed. The boy's relief was palpable, though he stayed close to his father. Thomas caught the pony's reins, speaking low and gentle until the animal stopped trembling. His movements were efficient, automatic, but Eliza noticed the slight shake in his hands. She'd seen him face down claim jumpers without flinching, but watching his son nearly die had cracked something in his composure. The rumble of hooves faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. Even the grasshoppers had gone silent. Then, from the direction the buffalo had gone, came the sound of horses, many horses, moving fast but controlled. "Get behind me," Thomas ordered, drawing his Winchester from the saddle scabbard. "No." Eliza moved a river to stand beside him instead. "If they meant harm, we'd already be surrounded." She was right. The riders appeared over the rise in a loose formation, 15, maybe 20 Comanche warriors. But, as Kiona had said, they carried no war shields, no lances. Their weapons were secured, bows unstrung and sheathed. They rode like men with purpose, but not aggression. At their head rode the young man who'd introduced himself as Little Star. Beside him, an older warrior with streaks of gray in his braided hair guided a powerful bay stallion. This man's bearing spoke of authority earned through years of leadership. He wore traditional dress-fringed leggings, a bone breastplate over a tanned hide shirt, and a single eagle feather standing upright from his scalp lock. The group stopped 50 feet away. The older man studied them with eyes that missed nothing, the rescue dust still coating Eliza's clothes. Caleb's tear-streaked face, Thomas's protective stance. "I am Red Moon," he said in accented but clear English. "War chief of the Southern Band, but today I come as witness, not warrior." His gaze settled on Eliza. "My nephew speaks truth. We saw the woman's courage, saw the child saved from death that should not have come." "The buffalo were driven," Kiona added. "We followed their trail from the burning grounds. Someone used fire and noise to turn them toward your ranch." Thomas lowered his rifle but didn't put it away. "Who?" Red Moon's expression darkened. "Men who think chaos serves their purpose. They burn without honor, drive the buffalo like cattle. We tracked them but lost the trail at Willow Creek. They know the land well enough to hide their passing." "Why tell us?" Eliza asked. "Because the child you saved could have been one of ours," Red Moon replied simply. Because those who brought this danger threaten all who live on this land, your people and mine. Because honor demands truth between those who have shared life and death." He made a gesture, and one of his warriors brought forward a bundle wrapped in painted hide. Red Moon took it, holding it formally. "Tomorrow we come to acknowledge the debt properly. 150 of our people, the peace speakers, the mothers, the wisdom keepers. We bring gifts to honor the courage we witnessed." He paused, studying Thomas's suspicious expression. "You fear treachery." "I fear misunderstanding," Thomas said carefully. "If word spreads that a Comanche war party is coming to my ranch, which is why we come openly, in daylight, with our women and children. No war party brings families." Red Moon's voice carried quiet authority. "We will approach from the east, where the sun rises. Our peace talkers will sing the friendship songs. Any who watch will see we come in gratitude, not aggression." Caleb, who had been silent through the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "She saved me," his young voice cracked. "Miss Eliza rode straight into them buffalo. I couldn't make my pony run, and she grabbed me up like I wasn't nothing but a sack of grain." Red Moon's weathered face softened slightly. He looked at the boy with something approaching approval. "You speak truth plainly. This is good. A man should acknowledge his debts." He turned to Eliza. "What clan do you come from?" "Wind Rider." "No clan," she said. "Just my father's daughter. He was a soldier." "Soldiers have clans too. They call them regiments." Red Moon studied her. "You ride like one born to the horse. Your father taught you." "He did." She didn't add that her father had learned from Apache scouts during his service, or that he'd insisted both his children learn to ride like their lives depended on it, which, as today proved, they did. Kiona urged his spotted horse forward slightly. "The ones who cut your fence and drove the buffalo, they left signs. Wagon tracks, shod horses, the smell of coal oil from their torches. They are not simple thieves." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Railroad men." "Perhaps, or those who wish to seem so." Red Moon gathered his reins. "Tomorrow at dawn, we will camp tonight at Singing Water, 5 miles east. If your people wish to send watchers, they will not be troubled." "Why risk coming at all?" Eliza asked. "You could acknowledge this debt privately." Red Moon and Kiona exchanged glances. The older man's expression grew grave. "Because there are winds of change blowing across this land, treaties made and broken, rails of iron cutting the buffalo roads. Soon there may be no place for gestures of honor between peoples. We choose to make this one while we still can." He raised his hand in farewell, and the group wheeled their horses as one. They rode away with the same controlled purpose, leaving only dust and questions. Thomas finally lowered his rifle completely. "This is going to be trouble." "It already is." Eliza nodded toward the cut fence. "The torn earth. Someone wanted your cattle scattered or stolen. Maybe they figured a buffalo stampede would provide cover, make it look like an accident. Or they wanted worse." His eyes went to Caleb, who was stroking his pony's neck with hands that still trembled slightly. "If you hadn't been checking the fence line—" "But I was." She didn't want to think about what might have been. "We need to get back, tell the hands, and someone needs to ride to town. Make sure the story gets told right." Thomas mounted his black, pulling Caleb up behind him since the boy was still shaky. "I'll send Miguel to town. He's got family there. They'll listen to him." They rode back toward the ranch house in thoughtful silence. The sun climbed higher, burning off the dust haze and revealing the damage the buffalo had done. A quarter-mile swath of prairie had been churned to powder. Fence posts snapped like twigs. It would take days to repair. But Eliza found herself thinking about Red Moon's words, winds of change. She'd felt them too in the way the railroad companies pushed ever westward, in the increasing conflicts over water and grazing rights, in the slow disappearance of the open range she'd known as a child. "Miss Eliza," Caleb's voice was small, "do you think they'll really come, all those Comanche?" "Red Moon strikes me as a man who keeps his word," she replied. Will there be trouble fighting? Thomas answered before she could. Not if we handle it right. But people fear what they don't understand. And fear makes folks stupid. They crested the rise that brought the ranch buildings into view, the main house with its wide porch and thick adobe walls. The bunkhouse where the hands slept. The sprawling barn and corrals. It looked peaceful in the morning light. But Eliza knew that peace was about to be tested. Miguel came running from the barn, followed by several other hands. The old vaquero's face was creased with worry. Patron, we heard shooting, saw the dust. The cattle in the east pasture are scattered to hell, and he stopped, seeing Caleb's dirt-streaked face and Eliza's dust-covered clothes. Madre de Dios, what happened? Thomas dismounted, setting Caleb on his feet. Buffalo stampede. Someone cut the fence, drove them through. Miss Hart saved Caleb from being trampled. The hands exchanged glances. Jake Morrison, a grizzled Texan who'd been with the ranch for 5 years, spat tobacco juice. Buffalo don't range here no more. Someone drove 'em. That's what the Comanche scouts said. Thomas confirmed. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Miguel crossed himself. How many? 20 or so today. But tomorrow. Thomas took a breath. Tomorrow. 150 are coming to the ranch. Peace delegation, to acknowledge a debt of honor for saving Caleb. The explosion of voices was immediate and predictable. Eliza let them get it out of their systems, the protests, the warnings, the dire predictions. She'd expected nothing less. These were good men, but they'd been raised on stories of raids and scalping, of kidnapped women and burned homesteads. That those days were largely past, that the Comanche were hemmed in by soldiers and settlements, didn't erase generations of fear. Enough. Thomas's battlefield voice cut through the babble. They come in peace, and they'll be received in peace. Any man who can't abide that can draw his pay and ride out now. No one moved, though Jake looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Miguel, I need you to ride to town. Tell Sheriff Watson what happened to all of it. The cut fence, the stampede, the rescue, and tomorrow's visit. Make sure he understands they're coming without weapons, bringing their families. Said Patron. Miguel was already moving toward the corral. Jake, take 3 men and start gathering the scattered cattle. Bill, check the other fence lines if they cut the north boundary. They might have hit others. Sam, double the night watch. I want men riding the perimeter until we know who did this. The hands scattered to their tasks, leaving Eliza standing with Thomas and Caleb in the ranch yard. The boy looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than they had this morning. Thank you, he said simply. I froze up. I couldn't make my hands work right, and then you were there and his voice broke. Eliza dismounted and knelt in front of him, putting her hands on his shoulders. You did fine. Sometimes our bodies know danger before our minds catch up. The important thing is you listened when I told you to jump. That took courage. Caleb managed a wobbly smile. Thomas put his hand on his son's head, but his eyes were on Eliza. Something passed between them, not words, but understanding. Tomorrow would bring challenges neither of them could fully predict. But for now, in this moment, his son was alive because she'd been willing to ride into death's path. The morning was aging toward noon, and there was much to do. But as Eliza stood and gathered River's reins, she felt the weight of tomorrow settling on her shoulders. 150 Comanche, coming to acknowledge a debt, a town full of people raised on fear and old hatreds. Someone clever enough to use buffalo as weapons and cruel enough not to care who got trampled. Red Moon was right. The winds of change were blowing, and tomorrow they would see which way those winds would carry them all. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows of the Hale Ranch house, casting long shadows across the scrubbed pine table. Eliza sat across from Thomas, both of them nursing cups of coffee that had gone cold while they talked through the implications of tomorrow's visit. Caleb had been sent to his room to rest, though they could hear him moving around overhead, too keyed up to sleep. 150. Thomas said again, as if repeating the number might make it less daunting. That's more than the whole population of Cedar Falls. They're bringing families, Eliza reminded him. Women and children. That's not how war parties travel. I know that. You know that. But Pike Mallory and his railroad cronies. Thomas shook his head. They'll paint it as an invasion. Hell, they probably planned it that way. Eliza had been thinking the same thing. The timing was too convenient, cut fences. A staged stampede. And now, a large gathering of Comanche that could be twisted into whatever story served certain interests. You think Mallory's behind the buffalo? Who else profits from chaos? He's been trying to buy up land along the proposed rail route for months. Scared ranchers sell cheap. Thomas stood, pacing to the window. And if violence breaks out tomorrow, he'll have all the excuse he needs to call in federal troops, clear out the Comanche, and probably half the smaller ranchers while he's at it. Then we make sure violence doesn't break out. He turned to look at her, and she saw the weight he carried in the lines around his eyes. How do we stop what's already in motion? Miguel won't reach town for another hour. By sunset, the whole county will know the Comanche are coming. By midnight, every man with a gun and a grudge will be heading this way. Eliza stood, moving to stand beside him at the window. The view stretched out across the working heart of the ranch corrals. Barn, the bunkhouse where she could see hands preparing for evening chores. It was a good life they'd built here, ordered and purposeful. Tomorrow would test whether it was strong enough to survive. We post men at the roads tonight, she said. Turn back the hotheads before they get close. Come morning, we meet the Comanche openly. Make the whole thing as visible and peaceful as possible. Hard to claim it's an attack when everyone can see children playing and women singing. And if Mallory brings his hired guns, then we deal with that when it comes. She met his gaze steadily. But we don't borrow trouble. We've got enough already. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, You could leave. No one would blame you. This isn't your fight. Isn't it? Eliza felt a flash of anger. I was the one who rode into those buffalo. I'm the one they're coming to honor. You think I'd run now? No, he said softly. I don't think you'd run from anything. That's what worries me. Before she could respond, they heard horses approaching fast. Thomas grabbed his rifle, but Eliza recognized the rider through the window. It's Ben Cooper from the telegraph office. They met him on the porch. Ben was a thin, nervous man who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Today he looked particularly miserable. Mr. Hale, Miss Hart. He stayed in the saddle, clearly planning to leave quickly. Thought you should know word's already spreading in town. Mallory's telling everyone the Comanche are massing for an attack. Says they use the buffalo stampede as a test, seeing how defended your ranch is. That's a damn lie. Thomas growled. Maybe so, but folks are listening. He's calling a town meeting for tonight, talking about forming a militia. Ben shifted uncomfortably. Sheriff Watson's trying to keep things calm, but Mallory's got Judge Thornton's ear, and half the town council owes money to his associates. What's Watson saying? Eliza asked. That everyone should wait for facts before forming lynch mobs. But you know how much good that does when people are scared. Ben gathered his reins. I've got to get back. Just thought you should have warning. After he left, Thomas and Eliza stood in silence on the porch. The sun was westering now, painting the grassland gold and red. Somewhere out there, Red Moon and his people were making camp, preparing for tomorrow's journey. They had no idea they were riding into a powder keg. I'll ride out to their camp, Eliza decided. Warn them. Like hell you will. It's near dark, and we don't know who else might be out there. Then what let them ride in blind tomorrow? Thomas gripped the porch rail, knuckles white. She could see him wrestling with it, the need to protect Waring with the demands of honor. Finally, he said, we'll send Joaquin. He's half Lipan Apache, speaks some Comanche, less likely to get shot by either side. It was a reasonable compromise, though Eliza chafed at being sidelined. While Thomas went to find Joaquin, She walked to the small foreman's cabin she'd been using since spring. It was spare but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her few possessions. On the wall hung her father's cavalry saber, one of the few things she'd kept after selling the family land. She washed the dust from her face and hands, changed into a fresh shirt, then sat on the bed to clean her colt. The familiar ritual calmed her, breaking down the weapon, oiling each part, reassembling it with practiced ease. Her father had taught her this too, along with the riding. A clean gun and a sound horse. He used to say, "They'll see you through most troubles." But not all troubles could be solved with guns and horses. Some required different tools, patience, wisdom, the ability to see past fear to possibility. She thought about Red Moon's weathered face, the dignity in his bearing. He was risking much to make this gesture. The least they could do was meet that risk with equal courage. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." To her surprise, it was Caleb. The boy stood in the doorway, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "Pa said I should rest, but I can't. Keep seeing them buffalo coming." "That's natural," Eliza said, setting the gun aside. "Close calls stay with us. It's how we learn to be careful next time." He edged into the room. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But sometimes we have to act despite the fear. That's what courage really is, not the absence of fear, but moving forward anyway." Caleb digested this. "Pa says the Comanche are coming tomorrow because of what you did." "That's right. And folks in town want to stop them." Eliza weighed her words carefully. "Some folks are afraid. They've heard stories, maybe lost people in the old days when things were different. Fear makes people do foolish things sometimes." "But the Comanche aren't coming to fight." "No, they're coming to say thank you, in their own way, to acknowledge a debt of honor." She studied the boy's earnest face. "You understand about honor, don't you? Your pa's taught you." Caleb nodded solemnly. "Keep your word. Pay your debts. Stand by what's right even when it's hard." "That's it exactly. Tomorrow. We'll have a chance to show that honor isn't bound by the color of a man's skin or the language he speaks. It's something deeper." The boy was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad you were there today. Miss Eliza, I'm glad you're here now too." After he left, Eliza sat in the gathering dusk, thinking about debts and honor and the weight of tomorrow. Through her window, she could see riders heading out Joaquin going to warn the Comanche, others taking positions on the roads to town. The ranch was preparing for siege, though whether from external threat or internal fear remained to be seen. She thought about Thomas's question. Why stay? Why not Saddle River and ride away from this brewing storm? The answer was complex and simple at once. She stayed because running wasn't in her nature. She stayed because a 12-year-old boy would have died today without her intervention, and that connected her to whatever came next. She stayed because Thomas Hale, for all his careful control, needed someone who wouldn't bend when the wind blew harsh. And if she was honest with herself, she stayed because something in Red Moon's eyes had spoken to her a recognition that they stood at a crossroads, not just for themselves, but for the future of this land they all called home. Tomorrow would tell whether they had the courage to choose the harder path, the one that led toward understanding rather than bloodshed. Night fell across the Texas plains, bringing a chill that spoke of autumn's approach. Somewhere in that darkness, forces were gathering, some for peace, some for war. Eliza cleaned her rifle, checked her ammunition, and prepared for what dawn would bring. Whatever happened, she'd meet it standing. The coffee pot on the stove began to bubble, filling the small cabin with its bitter comfort. She poured a cup and stood by the window, watching the stars emerge. Tomorrow, she thought, those stars would look down on either hope or tragedy. The choice, as always, lay in human hands. The kitchen of the main house glowed with lamplight as Eliza entered. Finding Thomas already there with Sheriff Watson and the two other men, she recognized Doc Brennan and Reverend Mills from town. The coffee pot was working overtime, and the air hung thick with tobacco smoke and tension. Miss Hart. Watson nodded. He was a solid man in his 50s, gray-bearded and steady. Tom's been filling us in. Hell of a thing you did today.
Anyone would have done the same,
Eliza said, taking the chair Thomas pulled out for her. No, Watson said firmly. They wouldn't have, which is why we're here. He glanced around the table. The town split. Mallory's got maybe 40 men ready to ride at dawn, claiming they're protecting the county from invasion. 40 armed men meeting a peaceful delegation. Doc Brennan muttered. He was a thin, scholarly man who'd patched up more bullet wounds than he cared to count. I can already see how that ends. Reverend Mills, younger than the others and still idealistic, leaned forward. There must be a way to prevent bloodshed. These are families coming, not warriors. Surely even Mallory. Mallory doesn't give a damn about families. Thomas cut him off. He wants an incident, something bloody enough to bring in the army, clear the land for his railroad interests. Eliza traced the wood grain of the table with one finger, thinking, what if we remove his excuse, meet the Comanche away from the ranch, out in the open where everyone can see, make it impossible to claim they're attacking? Where? Watson asked. Willow Creek Crossing. It's neutral ground. Good sight lines. We set up there at dawn. Wait for them to arrive. Anyone wants to start trouble has to do it in front of God and everybody. Thomas nodded slowly. It could work, but we'd need good men, not hotheads. I can bring 12 deputies, Watson said. Men I trust to keep their heads. I'll come too. Doc Brennan added. Nothing says peaceful like a doctor standing ready. Besides, someone should document this for the record. They spent the next hour planning, mapping out positions and contingencies. Joaquin returned near midnight, reporting that he'd successfully warned Red Moon about the situation. The Comanche leader had listened gravely, then said simply, "We will still come. Honor does not bend to threats." After the others left to make their preparations, Eliza found herself alone with Thomas in the kitchen. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle he kept in the sideboard. "To tomorrow," he said, raising his glass. "To getting through it," she amended. They drank in companionable silence. The house felt different at night older, full of shadows and memories. Eliza knew Thomas's wife had died in the bedroom upstairs, fevered and delirious after a difficult childbirth that took the baby too. He'd never spoken of it directly, but she'd heard the story from Miguel. "Elizabeth," Thomas said suddenly, using her full name for the first time. "What you did today, I haven't had the words to thank you properly. Words aren't necessary. Maybe not, but I need to say them." He turned the glass in his hands. "When Martha died, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Then I looked at Caleb and realized I was wrong. He became my whole world, maybe too much so. I've tried to protect him from every danger, control every risk. It's what fathers do. Is it, or is it just fear dressed up as love?" He met her eyes. "When I saw him in front of those buffalo today, saw you riding to save him, I realized something. We can't protect the people we care about from every danger. Sometimes all we can do is trust that there are good people in the world who'll help when help is needed." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Anyone would have—" "Stop saying that." His voice was gentle but firm. "Own your courage, Elizabeth. It's one of the things I—" He stopped, looked away. "One of the things I admire about you." The air between them grew charged with unspoken possibilities. Eliza found herself studying his profile in the lamplight, the strong jaw, the lines carved by sun and sorrow, the gray threading through his dark hair. He was a handsome man, she realized, though she'd trained herself not to notice such things. "I should go," she said, standing. "Dawn will come early." He stood too, and for a moment they were close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the leather and soap scent of him. "Elizabeth." "Tomorrow," she said softly. "Let's get through tomorrow first." He nodded. stepping back. Of course, you're right. She left through the kitchen door, walking quickly through the cool night air to her cabin. Her heart was beating faster than it should, and not from the walk. She'd been alone for so long, focused on work and survival, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to want something beyond the next day's tasks. But Thomas was right, tomorrow would test them all. This wasn't the time for whatever was growing between them, tender and unexpected as spring grass. That would have to wait for a day without the shadow of potential violence hanging over it. In her cabin, she found a surprised Maria. The cook had left a bundle on her bed. Inside was a clean riding skirt and jacket, better quality than her everyday wear, and a note, "For tomorrow, you stand for all of us, stand tall." Eliza touched the fabric, unexpectedly moved. She hadn't realized how the other ranch workers saw her, hadn't thought about representing anything beyond herself. But maybe that was what moments like these demanded, ordinary people standing for something larger than their own interests. She prepared for bed methodically, checking her weapons one more time, laying out the new clothes for morning. Through her window, she could see lights burning in the bunkhouse, men preparing for whatever dawn might bring. Somewhere in town, Mallory was probably holding court, stirring fear and greed into a poisonous brew. And 5 miles east, Red Moon's people were sleeping under the stars, trusting in the honor of strangers. Sleep came hard and left early. Eliza woke in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of horses and low voices. She dressed quickly in Maria's gift, pinned her hair severely back, and strapped on her gun belt. Her father's words echoed as she stepped out into the cold morning. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Beth. It's action in spite of it. The ranch yard was full of activity. Sheriff Watson had arrived with his deputies, all good men she recognized. Doc Brennan was loading medical supplies into a wagon, just in case. Reverend Mills stood talking earnestly with some of the ranch hands, probably offering prayers or reassurance. Thomas emerged from the main house, Caleb at his side. The boy wore his best clothes and a determined expression. "He insists on coming," Thomas said to Eliza's questioning look.
"Says he needs to thank them properly."
"It could be dangerous," Eliza warned.
"So was yesterday," Caleb said with surprising firmness. "You didn't let that stop you."
She couldn't argue with that logic. As the eastern sky began to lighten, their procession formed up, nearly 30 riders plus the doc's wagon. They rode out quietly, no one speaking much, everyone aware of the weight of what they were attempting. Willow Creek Crossing lay in a natural bowl of land, with good visibility in all directions. They arrived as the first rays of sun painted the grassland gold. Watson positioned his men carefully visible but not threatening, ready but not aggressive. Eliza and Thomas took position at the center, Caleb between them. They didn't have long to wait. As the sun cleared the horizon, a sound drifted across the prairie, singing, high and clear. The Comanche appeared over the eastern rise like something out of legend, moving in a long column with outriders on the flanks. The morning light caught on beadwork and silver, on the bright colors of blankets and shawls.
"My God," someone breathed. "There really are children."
Indeed, there were small faces peering curiously from behind their mothers. Older children riding their own ponies with careful pride. The warriors were there too, but as promised, their weapons were bound or sheathed. This was not a war party. This was a people. At the head of the column rode Red Moon, dignified in his ceremonial dress. Beside him, Little Star carried the peace staff high. They approached at a steady walk, giving everyone time to see, to understand, to choose their response. That's when Eliza spotted the dust cloud from the south, riders coming fast from town. Her hand moved instinctively to her gun, but Thomas caught her wrist.
"Not yet," he murmured. "Let's see who we're dealing with."
The Comanche had seen the new arrivals too. Red Moon raised his hand, and the column halted, waiting. The singing continued, but Eliza could see warriors subtly shifting position, ready to protect the women and children if needed. The riders from town thundered up, 40 or 50 men, Pike Mallory at their head. They pulled up hard at the edge of the gathering, horses milling and snorting. Mallory's pale eyes took in the scene, and Eliza could see him calculating, adjusting his plan. Well, he called out. Quite a gathering. Sheriff, I hope you're here to protect the good citizens of this county from this invasion. I'm here to keep the peace, Watson replied steadily, which seems to be holding just fine without your help. Pike. Does it? Mallory's gaze swept over the Comanche families. I see 150 hostiles on Texas soil. Some might call that an act of war. That's when Caleb did something that stopped everyone cold. He walked forward, out into the space between all the armed men, and stood there alone. His young voice carried clearly in the morning air. They're here because of me, he said, because Miss Eliza saved my life yesterday, and they want to say thank you. That's not war, that's just good manners. The morning sun climbed higher as Caleb stood alone between the two groups, his small figure casting a long shadow across the grass. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Red Moon dismounted from his bay stallion with the careful dignity of a man who understood the power of gesture. He walked forward slowly, stopping 10 feet from the boy. You are the one who was saved, Red Moon asked in English. Yes, sir, Caleb replied, his voice steady despite the weight of all those watching eyes. Red Moon studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You have courage to stand here. This is good. He raised his voice so all could hear. Yesterday, this child would have died beneath the hooves of buffalo that were driven by those without honor. The woman Eliza Hart rode into death to pull him to safety. This debt must be acknowledged. He gestured, and Little Star came forward carrying a large bundle wrapped in painted buffalo hide. Other members of the delegation dismounted, bringing more bundles forward. The warriors who carried them were young men, their faces painted with symbols of peace, white clay, and blue earth. These are our Omega, Red Moon explained, indicating the young men. In your tongue, perhaps you would say peacemakers. They speak for harmony between peoples. He opened the first bundle, revealing a beautifully worked buffalo robe, the hide soft and painted with images of running horses. For the woman who rides like the wind. More gifts were unveiled, a knife with an intricately carved bone handle, beaded moccasins, a necklace of elk teeth and trade beads. Each was presented with formal words, acknowledging the debt and honoring the courage witnessed. Pike Mallory spurred his horse forward. This is all very touching, but... Silence. The word cracked like a whip from an unexpected source. Reverend Mills had stepped forward, his usually mild face stern. You stand on ground made sacred by an act of selfless courage. You will not profane it with your poison. Reverend's right, Sheriff Watson added, his hand resting casually on his pistol. This is a lawful gathering. Anyone disrupts it, they'll answer to me. Mallory's pale eyes narrowed, but he could count. His 40 men were outnumbered by the combined force of Watson's deputies, the ranch hands, and the Comanche warriors. More importantly, Doc Brennan was already scribbling notes, documenting everything. Any violence here would have witnesses, consequences. Eliza dismounted and walked forward to accept the gifts. As she approached, the women in the Comanche group began singing again, a different song this time, lower and more rhythmic. She recognized it as an honoring song, though she couldn't understand the words. I am grateful, she said to Red Moon, but I need no payment for doing what was right. This is not payment, Red Moon corrected gently. This is recognition. When one person saves a child, they save all the children that child will have, all the good that life will bring to the world. This must be marked. Little Star stepped forward then, and Eliza realized he was probably only a few years older than Caleb. May I speak? He asked Red Moon in English. At the chief's nod, the young man turned to face the assembled crowds. I have lived 19 summers. I have seen the buffalo grow few, the iron road cut across our hunting grounds. I have heard the old ones speak of days when our peoples fought, when blood fed the grass on both sides. His voice grew stronger, But I have also seen a white woman risk her life for a white child, and my people come to honor that courage. Perhaps this is a sign. Perhaps the Creator shows us that courage and honor know no tribe, no color. Perhaps there is a way forward that is not written in blood. Pretty words, Mallory sneered. But words won't change what's coming. The railroad will come through and you people will move or be moved. Is that a threat? Thomas asked quietly, walking up to stand beside Eliza and Caleb. It's progress, Mallory shot back. The future. Your Comanche friends here are the past. No. The voice was unexpected, one of Mallory's own men. A younger fellow Eliza recognized as Ben Harper. No, Mr. Mallory. I don't think that's right. Harper dismounted, pulling off the gun belt Mallory had probably paid for. I came here expecting savages. What I see is families. What I see is people trying to do right by each other. Get back on your horse, Harper, Mallory growled. I don't think I will. Harper walked over to Sheriff Watson. I'd like to volunteer as a deputy. Sheriff, seems like you're the only one interested in real law around here. Two more of Mallory's men followed Harper's lead. The careful balance was shifting, and Mallory knew it. His face flushed red with fury. But before he could speak, there was new movement from the Comanche delegation. An elderly woman was helped down from a travois by two younger women. She moved slowly, but with purpose, her white hair braided with beads and feathers. The entire Comanche group showed her deep respect, even Red Moon bowing his head as she passed. She walked straight to Eliza, studying her with eyes that held decades of wisdom and loss. Then she reached out and took Eliza's hands in her own weathered ones. I am Morning Song, she said in careful English. I have birthed 7 children, lost 3 to the white man's sickness, 1 to the blue coat soldiers. My heart has known much sorrow. She squeezed Eliza's hands. But today I see hope. Today I see a woman who values life above fear. This is good medicine. She reached into her pouch and pulled out something small, a carved wooden horse, no bigger than a child's thumb. This was my son's. He would have been a great horseman, like you. Take it. Remember that every life saved makes the world larger. Eliza's eyes burned with unexpected tears. I will treasure it, grandmother. The old woman smiled, patted her cheek, then turned to Caleb. And you, small warrior, you will remember this day. Yes, ma'am, forever. Good. When you are grown, when others speak of hatred between peoples, you tell them of this morning. You tell them we came in peace to honor courage. She looked directly at Mallory then, and her gentle voice carried steel. You tell them that those who sow discord reap emptiness. The ceremony continued as the sun climbed higher. More gifts were exchanged: blankets for the ranch, beadwork for Maria, who had provided Eliza's clothes, even a small bow for Caleb, which made him grin with delight. The Comanche children, growing bolder, ventured closer to stare at the strange pale people. Then Red Moon called for silence. There is one more matter, he said. The buffalo that nearly killed this boy, they were driven by men who used fire to frighten them. We found their trail, followed it to where they thought they were clever. He produced something from his pouch, a brass button with an insignia. This comes from the coat of railroad guards. Perhaps someone has lost it. The button gleamed in the morning light. Eliza saw Mallory's jaw tighten, saw him glance at one of his men whose coat was conspicuously missing a button. That proves nothing, Mallory said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Red Moon tossed the button to Sheriff Watson. Your law may see differently, but that is your concern. Ours is finished here. He turned to Thomas and Eliza. We have spoken of building a new way between our peoples. Perhaps we start small. The creek that runs between your land and our hunting grounds, both sides need water. Perhaps we share it, set markers so all know where peace lives. I'd be honored to discuss it, Thomas said formally. Good. I will send Little Star in 1 moon's time. We will talk like men who want their children to live without fear. Red Moon mounted his horse, then looked back. The woman who rides like wind, she has shown us something today. Courage is not the property of one people. It lives where hearts are strong. The Comanche began to mount up, preparing to leave, but then one of the children, a girl of perhaps 6, broke away from her mother and ran to Eliza. She thrust something into Eliza's hands, a small doll made of corn husks and cloth, then ran back, hiding behind her mother's skirts. As the long column began to move east, singing their departure song, Pike Mallory made one last attempt. "This changes nothing," he shouted. "The railroad is coming whether you make nice with savages or not." But his words fell flat. Too many people had seen what really happened here, the gifts, the children, the old grandmother's blessing. Even some of his own men looked uncomfortable. Sheriff Watson rode over to Mallory. "Pike, I'll be wanting to talk to you about that button, and about who might have cut fence wire and driven buffalo onto Hale land. Seems like we might have ourselves a criminal investigation." Mallory wheeled his horse around without answering, spurring away with what remained of his hired guns. The dust of their departure mingled with that of the Comanche column heading the opposite direction, until both disappeared into the vast Texas morning. Those who remained the ranch hands, the deputies, the witnesses from town stood in small groups, talking quietly. Something had shifted in the space of a morning. Some old assumption cracked open to let in new light. Caleb tugged on Eliza's sleeve. "Miss Eliza, do you think they'll really come back to talk about the water?" She looked down at him. This boy whose life had changed everything. "I think they will. Red Moon strikes me as a man of his word." "Like Pa," Caleb said simply, "like you." Thomas joined them, his expression thoughtful. "We'll need to be ready. Mallory won't give up easily, and there'll be others who see any cooperation with the Comanche as betrayal. Then we'd better make sure it works." Eliza said, "Make it work so well that even the doubters have to admit there's a better way." As they prepared to ride back to the ranch, Eliza noticed something. Mixed among the hoof prints in the dust were the smaller tracks of children's feet, Comanche and white alike, who had crept close to stare at each other with curious eyes. Tomorrow those children would be separated by miles and mistrust again. But for one morning, they had stood on the same ground, breathed the same air, witnessed the same hope. It was a small thing, perhaps, but small things, Eliza had learned, were how the world changed one saved life, one act of courage, one morning of peace at a time. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each person lost in thoughts of what had transpired. The morning's tension had given way to a cautious hope, fragile as spring ice. Eliza rode beside Thomas, aware of Caleb chattering excitedly to Doc Brennan about his new bow. But her mind was elsewhere on Red Moon's proposal, on Mallory's threats, on the weight of what they'd set in motion. They were barely halfway home when Jake Morrison spurred up beside them, pointing northwest. "Smoke, boss! Big smoke!" Thomas stood in his stirrups, shading his eyes. The column of black smoke rising into the clear morning sky was unmistakable. "That's coming from the direction of the new hay meadow," Eliza finished. Her stomach dropped. That meadow represented winter feed for 500 head of cattle. Without it, they'd have to sell off half the herd at whatever price Mallory's associates offered. "Could be an accident," Sheriff Watson said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Could be," Thomas agreed grimly. "Jake, take 5 men and get there fast. See what can be saved. The rest of us need to protect the ranch." As Jake and his group peeled off, Eliza caught Thomas's eye. They both knew this was Mallory's response to his humiliation at Willow Creek. If he couldn't provoke violence between the settlers and the Comanche, he'd create a different kind of chaos. They pushed the horses harder, arriving at the ranch to find Miguel organizing a bucket brigade from the well. But it was clear even from a distance that the hay meadow was lost. The smoke billowed black and thick, the kind that came from grain soaked in coal oil. "Deliberate," Watson confirmed, studying the scene. "No way that caught naturally. Not with the dew still on this morning." "Can you prove it?" Thomas asked. Proving and knowing are two different things, the sheriff replied. But I'll try. Ben, Charlie, ride the perimeter. Look for tracks. Anything the fire setters might have dropped. While Watson's men investigated, Eliza helped organize the ranch's defense. If Mallory was bold enough to torch the hayfield in broad daylight, there was no telling what might come next. She positioned riflemen on the barn roof, set up a watch rotation, made sure the ammunition was distributed. It was early afternoon when unexpected help arrived. Little Star appeared with 20 Comanche warriors, all armed but riding under the peace banner. We saw the smoke. He explained to Thomas. Red Moon sends us. He says, those who would burn your grass would burn ours. Today your fight is our fight. Thomas hesitated, clearly torn between gratitude and worry about how this would look to townsfolk already on edge. Accept the help, Eliza advised quietly. We need it, and it sends a message we stand together or fall separately. Thomas nodded slowly, then addressed Little Star. We're grateful. Can your men help watch the eastern approaches? That's our weak spot. As the Comanche warriors took their positions, working smoothly alongside the ranch hands, Reverend Mills approached Eliza. This is unprecedented, he said, though he didn't sound disapproving. I've been in Texas 15 years. Never seen anything like it. Maybe it's time we did, Eliza replied. The afternoon wore on with tense vigilance. The fire in the hay meadow burned itself out, leaving 40 acres of blackened stubble and the ranch's winter feed gone. Jake returned with singed clothes and bad news they'd saved nothing. Near sunset, Sheriff Watson's investigation bore fruit. His deputy, Ben Harper, returned with evidence fresh wagon tracks leading from the burned field toward town, and something else, a dropped leather glove monogrammed with the initials PM. Sloppy? Watson muttered. Or arrogant. Either way, it's enough to bring him in for questioning. He'll have 20 witnesses saying he was elsewhere, Thomas pointed out. Maybe, but the glove puts pressure on him, and pressure makes men stupid. Watson mounted up. I'll need statements from everyone about this morning's events, too. Doc Brennan's already writing his account. Judge Thornton may be in Mallory's pocket, but there are honest judges in the county seat. After Watson left, the ranch settled into an uneasy evening routine. The Comanche warriors shared a meal with the ranch hands, an awkward but historic moment, as men who might have shot at each other a decade ago passed beans and biscuit around the same fire. Eliza found herself on the porch with Thomas as darkness fell. Caleb had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was asleep inside. The gifts from the morning ceremony were spread on the porch table, the painted buffalo robe, the beaded items, the small wooden horse that seemed to hold decades of sorrow and hope. Hell of a day, Thomas said finally. It's not over, Eliza replied. Mallory won't stop with burned hay. I know. He was quiet for a moment. But something changed today. Did you see Harper and those other men walking away from easy money because they recognized what was right? I saw. And the Comanche coming to help defend the ranch. A year ago, I'd have called that impossible. Eliza picked up the wooden horse, running her thumb over its smooth surface. Morning Song, the grandmother, she knew exactly what she was doing, making it personal. Hard to hate people when you've looked into a grandmother's eyes, seen her grief and her hope. Is that what did it for you? Thomas asked. Made you see them as people, not enemies. My father served with Apache scouts in the army, Eliza admitted. He used to say the only difference between us and them was which side of the river we were born on. Everything else, courage, honor, love for our children, that was the same. Your father sounds like he was ahead of his time. He was a good man who'd seen too much killing. It changed him, made him value life differently. She set the wooden horse down carefully. I think that's why I couldn't let fear stop me yesterday. He'd have been ashamed if I had. Thomas shifted closer on the bench. He'd have been proud of what you did, not just saving Caleb, but everything after, standing between those guns this morning, accepting Red Moon's proposal that took a different kind of courage. We both stood there, she reminded him. Together, he agreed. and something in the way he said it made her pulse quicken. Before either could say more, Little Star approached. "The night watch is set," he reported. "My warriors know to wake your men if they see anything. We work together." "Yes." "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "And thank you. This means more than you know." Little Star smiled slightly. "Red Moon says debts of honor run both directions. Today you stood for us before your people. Tonight we stand for you. This is balance." After he left, Eliza and Thomas sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Despite the day's violence and tomorrow's uncertainties, there was peace in this moment. Two people who'd found something unexpected in each other, sitting on a porch while ancient enemies kept watch together in the darkness. "Elizabeth," Thomas said softly, "when this is over, when we've dealt with Mallory and established the water compact with Red Moon, there's something I want to say to you." She turned to look at him, seeing in his eyes what he wasn't quite ready to put into words. "I'll be here," she said simply. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers calloused and warm. They sat that way as the night deepened, their joined hands a promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. From the bunkhouse came the sound of laughter, Comanche and white voices mingling over some shared joke. It was just one night, Eliza knew, one fragile moment of cooperation that could shatter at the first sign of trouble. But it was also proof that change was possible, that the old hatreds weren't carved in stone. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The ancient song of the prairie, unchanged by human conflicts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mallory's next move, the town's reaction to Comanche warriors defending the ranch, the delicate work of building trust where only suspicion had lived. But tonight, under the wheel of stars, with Thomas's hand warm in hers and the unexpected gift of unity surrounding them, Eliza allowed herself to hope. Not for a perfect world, she was too practical for that, but for a better one, built one act of courage at a time. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of burned hay along with something else rain on the horizon. The drought would break soon, bringing life back to the scorched earth. Nature had its own way of balancing the scales, washing clean what fire had damaged. Perhaps, Eliza thought, people could learn to do the same. The fire came just before dawn, when the watch was changing and men's attention wavered between sleep and waking. Eliza jerked awake to shouts and the acrid smell of smoke, not distant this time, but close, immediate, dangerous. She grabbed her boots and rifle, bursting from her cabin to see flames licking at the southern fence line. The wind had shifted in the night, blowing hard from the south, pushing fire toward the ranch buildings with terrifying speed. "Fire all hands!" Thomas's voice carried over the chaos as men stumbled from the bunkhouse. The Comanche warriors were already moving, Little Star directing them with sharp commands in their own language. "They're burning us out," Jake Morrison shouted, pointing to where new fires bloomed along the eastern perimeter. This was no accident. Someone had set multiple blazes, timing them to trap the ranch between walls of flame. "Forget who did it," Eliza commanded. "We fight the fire first, or there won't be a ranch left to argue over." She turned to Miguel. "Get every bucket, every shovel. Soak the buildings if the fire reaches them. We're finished." Thomas appeared at her side, his face grim in the orange light. "The cattle in the north pasture." "I'll get them," she said, already moving toward river. "You coordinate the fire lines." "Elizabeth, no, the smoke will be too thick." "Then I'd better ride fast." She swung into the saddle, not waiting for his protest. The next hour blurred into a nightmare of smoke and flame. Eliza and 5 volunteers, 3 ranch hands, and 2 Comanche warriors rode straight into hell to move 200 head of panicked cattle away from the advancing fire. The smoke was so thick she could barely see River's ears, trusting the mare's instincts to find clear ground. Behind them, the fire roared like a living thing, consuming the dry grass with horrifying speed. Cattle bellowed in terror, scattering in all directions. One of the Comanche warriors, a young man whose name she didn't know, rode with extraordinary skill, using his horse to turn the leaders of the herd. gradually bringing order to chaos. They lost some. Eliza could hear the awful sounds behind them, but saved most, driving them through a gap in the fence to safety. By the time they emerged from the smoke, her throat was raw, eyes streaming, clothes singed and blackened. The scene at the ranch was organized chaos. Thomas had established a command post on the porch, directing teams with military precision. The women and children had been evacuated to the root cellar. Men worked in lines, passing buckets, digging fire breaks, beating at spot fires with wet blankets. Most remarkably, the Comanche and ranch hands worked as one unit, communication barriers forgotten in the face of common threat. Eliza saw Little Star and Jake Morrison working side by side to save the barn, their differences irrelevant compared to the enemy they faced. The East is holding, Doc Brennan reported, his usually neat appearance disheveled and soot-stained. But the South line is failing. Fire's going to jump the creek. Not if we burn it first. Red Moon's voice came from behind them. The war chief had arrived with 30 more warriors, all carrying torches. Fight fire with fire. We burn a line here, he gestured. Rob it of fuel. Thomas looked at Eliza. She nodded. He's right. It's our only chance. Do it, Thomas ordered. What followed was controlled destruction. The Comanche warriors spread out along a predetermined line, setting careful fires that burned back toward the main blaze. It was dangerous work, requiring precise timing and deep knowledge of how fire behaved. One mistake would doom them all. Eliza found herself working alongside Morning Song's grandson, a boy of perhaps 16, despite the language barrier. They developed an efficient rhythm. She cleared brush while he set the controlled burns, both watching for wind shifts that could turn their weapon against them. The strategy worked. As the sun rose through the smoky haze, the two fires met in a spectacular collision, consuming each other and leaving only blackened earth. The ranch was saved, though barely. The flames had come within 50 yards of the main house. As the immediate danger passed, exhaustion hit like a physical blow. Men collapsed where they stood, too tired to care that they were sitting in ash and dirt. Someone passed around a water barrel, and Eliza watched Comanche and white men drink from the same ladle without thought. That's when Sheriff Watson arrived with a dozen men, including Judge Thornton himself. The judge was a heavy man who rarely left town, and his presence meant something significant had happened. Tom Hale, the judge called out. I need to speak with you. Thomas stood slowly, fatigue in every movement. Judge. We arrested Pike Mallory an hour ago, Thornton announced. Caught him trying to leave town with saddlebags full of railroad company gold. Seems he was paid to clear this land by any means necessary. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Eliza felt a savage satisfaction finally, proof that even Mallory's friends couldn't ignore. But that's not why I'm here. Thornton continued. He looked uncomfortable, mopping his red face with a handkerchief. The fire wasn't just set at your ranch. Mallory's men also torched the Comanche camp at Singing Water. If Red Moon's people hadn't been here helping you. The implications hit everyone at once. Women and children. Elders too old to travel fast, they would have been trapped by the flames. The mutual defense had saved lives on both sides. Red Moon stepped forward, his dignity intact despite being covered in soot and ash. Your man Mallory, he wanted us to blame you for the fire at our camp. Wanted us to attack in revenge. His weathered face showed grim satisfaction. He did not count on us talking to each other first. Nor did he count on what I saw this morning, Reverend Mills added, emerging from the crowd. I've been up all night, helping where I could. I've seen these people, all of them, risk their lives for each other. This is God's work. Judge, the breaking down of old hatred, the building of something new. Judge Thornton cleared his throat. Yes, well, in light of Mallory's confession and the evidence against him, all charges related to this incident are dropped. Furthermore, he paused, seeming to wrestle with the words. The county officially recognizes the mutual aid agreement between the Hale Ranch and Red Moon's band. Sheriff Watson will file the paperwork. It was a grudging acknowledgement, but official nonetheless. The first legal recognition of cooperation between settlers and Comanche in the county's history. As the officials departed and the cleanup began, Eliza found a quiet moment to wash the worst of the soot from her face and hands. The wooden horse mourning song had given her was still in her pocket, somehow surviving the night's chaos. She pulled it out, running her fingers over the smooth carving. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Thomas's voice came from behind her. "Riding into that smoke to save the cattle." She turned to face him, seeing her own exhaustion mirrored in his eyes. "We all did what was needed." "No." He stepped closer, his hand coming up to touch a burn on her cheek she hadn't even noticed. "You did more. You always do more." His voice dropped. "When I saw you ride into that smoke, I realized something. I can't wait for the perfect moment to tell you how I feel. There might not be one." "Thomas, I love you, Elizabeth." The words came out rough, urgent. "I've loved you since you stood up at that first meeting and told Mallory exactly what kind of snake he was. Maybe before that. I know the timing is—" She stopped his words the simplest way possible, by stepping into his arms and kissing him. He tasted of smoke and coffee and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw wonder in his eyes. "Is that a yes to the question I haven't asked yet?" he said, a smile tugging at his soot-streaked face. "Ask me when we're not covered in ash and half dead from fighting fires," she replied. But she was smiling too. A whoop from nearby made them step apart. Caleb stood there, grinning despite the chaos around them. "Does this mean you're staying forever, Miss Eliza?" "Caleb," Thomas started, but Eliza laughed. "We'll see. Young man, right now, we have a ranch to rebuild," as if to underscore her words. Little Star approached with a message from Red Moon. "The chief says we will stay and help clean up. Many hands make light work, also." He smiled slightly. "We need to discuss the water agreement. Seems like a good time, when we have all fought for the same land." The sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the damage. Miles of fence gone. Pastures blackened. The hay meadow a total loss. It would take months to recover, and that was if they could afford to buy feed for the winter. But as Eliza watched Comanche and settlers working side by side, sharing tools and water, even managing rough communication through gestures and shared purpose, she felt hope rising like green shoots through burned earth. They had faced the worst Pike Mallory could throw at them, and survived not through force of arms, but through cooperation. The fire that was meant to destroy had instead forged something new, tempering the fragile bonds of the morning ceremony into something stronger. There would be other challenges, legal battles over water rights, the railroads' continued pressure, the slow work of building trust between peoples with generations of enmity. But they had proved it could be done. They had written a different story than the one Mallory intended, one where courage and cooperation trumped greed and hatred. As Thomas called out orders and men moved to obey Comanche and White, working as one, Eliza touched the wooden horse in her pocket again. Morning song had been right. Every life saved made the world larger. Today, they had all saved each other. The work of rebuilding could begin. The town meeting convened in the saloon's main room 3 days after the fire, every seat taken and men standing along the walls. Judge Thornton presided from behind the bar, looking uncomfortable with the weight of what needed deciding. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and tension. Eliza sat with Thomas near the front, acutely aware of the divided room. On one side sat the ranchers and townspeople who'd witnessed the morning ceremony and the night of the fire. On the other clustered Mallory's remaining supporters, men with investments in the railroad, shopkeepers who feared losing business, and those who simply couldn't let go of old prejudices. Sheriff Watson stood to present the evidence. Pike Mallory has confessed to paying men to cut the Hale Ranch fence and drive buffalo toward the buildings. He's also confessed to setting the fires, both at the ranch and at the Comanche camp. He held up a leather journal. This contains records of payments from the Prairie and Western Railroad Company for land clearing activities.
Where is Mallory now?
Someone called out. County jail, awaiting trial. The federal marshal's been notified, since crimes against Indian camps fall under federal jurisdiction. A murmur ran through the crowd. Federal involvement meant serious consequences. That's all well and good, spoke up Cyrus Hartwell, who owned the general store. But what about this so-called agreement between Hale and the Comanche? We can't have Indians coming and going as they please. They saved the ranch, Doc Brennan said firmly. I was there. Without their help, the fire would have taken everything. And without the ranch protecting the water sources, half the county would dry up, added Ben Harper, who'd become one of Watson's permanent deputies. Judge Thornton banged his gavel. We're here to formalize what's already been started. Mr. Hale, present your proposal. Thomas stood, and Eliza saw him gather himself the way he must have before a cavalry charge. The Willow Creek Water Compact is simple. The Comanche band, led by Red Moon, gets access to water along a 5-mile stretch of the creek. In exchange, they help patrol for rustlers and provide information about any threats to area ranches. No permanent camps within 3 miles of any homestead. Any disputes get handled by a joint council, 3 from each side. You're asking us to trust savages? Hartwell protested. I'm asking you to trust your own eyes. Thomas shot back. How many of you have lost cattle to rustlers this past year? How many have had fences cut, water poisoned? The Comanche aren't our enemies, the railroad speculators are. Little Star entered then, having waited outside as agreed. He walked with quiet dignity to the front of the room. I speak for Red Moon. We do not ask for your trust. Trust is earned slowly, like water wearing down stone. We ask only for the chance to earn it. Pretty words, sneered Jonas Briggs, one of Mallory's crowd. But we all know what Indians really want. Give them an inch. His words were cut off by an unexpected voice. Margaret Olson, the banker's widow, stood up in the back. She rarely spoke at public meetings, but when she did, people listened. Mr. Briggs, my husband was killed by Comanche raiders 15 years ago. I have more reason than most to hate. She paused, her voice steady. But I also have eyes. I saw those warriors risk their lives to save the Hale Ranch. I saw their women and children flee fires set by white men. If they can put aside the past for the sake of the future, shouldn't we at least try? The room fell silent. Mrs. Olson sat down. Her piece said, Reverend Mills stood next. I've prayed on this matter. What I've seen these past days isn't just cooperation, it's transformation. The breaking down of barriers that seemed permanent. If that's not the Lord's work, I don't know what is. The Lord's work? Briggs scoffed. Next you'll be saying we should hand over our daughters. The sound of a rifle being cocked cut him off. Everyone turned to see Eliza standing. Her Winchester pointed at the ceiling but ready. Mr. Briggs, she said with deadly calm. I've had about enough of your poison. These people came to honor the saving of a child's life. They fought fire alongside us when they could have let us burn. If you can't see the good in that, then perhaps you're the one who doesn't belong here. You dare threaten me, woman. I dare speak truth. She lowered the rifle but kept it ready. And the truth is, we need this agreement, not just for water or protection, but because the alternative is endless bloodshed. Is that the legacy you want to leave your children? Judge Thornton banged his gavel before anyone else could speak. We'll put it to a vote, all in favor of recognizing the Willow Creek Water Compact. Hands went up more than half the room, though not by much. Eliza saw some surprising faces among the yes votes, people she'd have bet against. The fire and its aftermath had changed minds. Motion carries. Thornton announced, Sheriff Watson will file the papers with the county clerk. Any interference with the compact's provisions will be treated as a criminal matter. As the meeting broke up, Eliza found herself surrounded by well-wishers and detractors alike. She noticed Thomas deep in conversation with Little Star and several ranchers, working out patrol schedules and communication methods. This was really happening, a formal agreement between settlers and Comanche, recognized by law. Outside, she nearly ran into Jonas Briggs. His face was twisted with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won something here. The railroad's coming whether you like it or not. And when it does, all your Indian loving won't mean a thing." "Maybe," Eliza said evenly. "But today isn't that day. Today, we chose a different path." Briggs spat at her feet and stormed off. Eliza watched him go. Knowing he was right about one thing, this wasn't over. There would be more challenges. More men like Mallory, who saw profit in division and chaos. But as she turned back to the saloon, she saw something that gave her hope. Little Star was demonstrating rope tricks to a group of town children, their initial fear giving way to delight. Two of the mother's women, who'd probably never spoken to an Indian in their lives, were chatting with one of the younger Comanche women who'd accompanied Little Star, comparing beadwork techniques. Small things, perhaps, but revolutions often started with small things. Thomas appeared at her elbow, ready to head back. In a moment, she watched as old Sam Tucker, whose brother had been killed in a Comanche raid 20 years ago, offered his flask to one of the warriors. The man accepted, and they drank together in silence, two old enemies sharing whiskey and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of understanding. "You did good in there," Thomas said quietly, "standing up to Briggs like that. Someone had to. Fear only grows in silence." Speaking of fear, he turned to face her fully. "I believe we have some unfinished business from the other morning. Something about a question I haven't asked yet." Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, Eliza felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Your timing remains questionable. Mr. Hale, we're standing in a saloon parking area, covered in trail dust, with half the county watching. When has an audience ever stopped you from doing what's right?" He took her hand, right there in public, not caring who saw. "Elizabeth Hart, you've brought light to my life and hope to this whole county. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" From inside the saloon came a whoop. Clearly someone had been watching through the window. Within seconds, they were surrounded by well-wishers and curious onlookers, including Caleb, who'd apparently been hiding behind a wagon. "Say yes, Miss Eliza," the boy called out. "Pa's been practicing that speech for 2 days." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Little Star was smiling. Eliza looked at Thomas, this good man who'd opened his heart despite loss, who'd risked everything to do what was right. Around them, the town that had just voted for hope over fear. Above them, the vast Texas sky that had seen so much bloodshed and might now witness something better. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." The cheer that went up could probably be heard at the Comanche camp 5 miles away. Someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu music broke out. It was chaos and celebration, and in the middle of it all, Thomas kissed her soundly, not caring one bit about propriety. Later, as they finally made their way back to the ranch, Eliza reflected on the strange turns life could take. A week ago, she'd been simply a ranch foreman, good with horses and cattle, keeping her heart carefully guarded. Now she was engaged to be married, part of a historic agreement between peoples, and somehow at the center of changes that would ripple out across the county for years to come. "No regrets?" Thomas asked as they rode side by side. "None," she said firmly. "Though I do wonder what my father would think of all this. I think he'd be proud. You honored his memory by choosing courage over fear, just like he taught you." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Thomas added, "We'll need to plan a wedding. Nothing too fancy, but—" "Actually," Eliza interrupted, struck by a sudden thought. "What if we did something different? What if we held the ceremony at Willow Creek, right at the boundary between the ranch and Comanche territory? Show everyone that this new partnership is real, that we're committed to making it work." Thomas considered this. It would make a statement, Some folks won't like it. Some folks don't like me wearing pants and running cattle either. Hasn't stopped me yet." He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. "No, it hasn't. All right, Elizabeth soon to be Hale. A wedding at Willow Creek it is. We'll make history one way or another." As the ranch came into view, Eliza saw riders approaching Red Moon and several of his warriors come to formalize patrol arrangements. The war chief raised his hand in greeting, and Thomas returned the gesture. Change, Eliza thought, came in many forms. Sometimes it roared in like a buffalo stampede or a wildfire, but sometimes it came quietly in a gesture of respect, a shared drink, a wedding that bridged two worlds. Whatever form it took, she was ready for it. 5 years had passed since the morning 150 Comanche rode to Hale Ranch. The schoolhouse that stood at Willow Creek Crossing was built of good pine timber, its windows facing east to catch the morning light. Children's voices carried through those windows, now reciting lessons in 2 languages, because Miss Sarah Chen, the teacher they'd hired from San Francisco, believed in preparing them for a changing world. Eliza stood on the schoolhouse porch, watching her daughter chase Little Star's son around the playground. Emma was 3, with her mother's determination and her father's steady gray eyes. The boy, called Jimmy at school but Swift Hawk at home, was 5 and already showing signs of his father's diplomatic gifts. He let Emma catch him just often enough to keep the game interesting. "Never thought I'd see the day," said a familiar voice. Eliza turned to find Jake Morrison leaning against the porch rail. The old cowhand had grown grayer, but no less tough in the intervening years. "Which part?" Eliza asked. "The school, the children playing together, or me standing still for more than 5 minutes?" Jake chuckled. "All of it, I suppose, though you still don't stand still much. Heard you and Red Moon's nephew tracked those horse thieves clear to the border last week. Someone had to. Can't have people thinking the compact makes us soft." It was true. The Willow Creek Water Compact had evolved into something much more than its original scope. What started as a simple agreement about water and mutual defense had grown into a complex partnership. The Comanche helped track rustlers and guided cavalry patrols away from sacred sites. The ranchers shared veterinary knowledge and supported the right of Comanche children to attend the territorial school. Not everyone was happy about it. There had been challenges, legal attempts to invalidate the compact, intimidation of families who participated, even a few violent incidents. But each challenge had been met and overcome, strengthening the bonds between the communities. "Pa Ma," Caleb's voice called out. Now 17 and tall as his father, he rode up with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. Beside him rode Swift Fox, one of the young Comanche women who helped manage the horse breeding program they'd started. Eliza noticed the way they carefully didn't look at each other and hid a smile. Some things never changed, no matter what language young people spoke. "Federal marshals at the house," Caleb reported. "Says he's got news about the railroad." Eliza and Thomas, he'd been inside reviewing the school's accounts, exchanged glances. They'd known this day would come. The Prairie and Western Railroad had been inching closer for 2 years, buying up land through shell companies, lobbying in Washington for right-of-way through treaty lands. They rode back to find Marshal William Cord waiting on the porch, a lean man with intelligent eyes and prematurely white hair. Beside him sat Red Moon, now showing his age but still commanding, and Little Star, who'd grown into his role as a bridge between worlds. "Mrs. Hale, Mr. Hale." The marshal nodded. "Chief Red Moon, I've got mixed news from Washington." "Let's hear it," Thomas said, helping Eliza dismount while trying not to be obvious about her condition. At 4 months pregnant with their second child, she was still insisting she could ride as well as ever, though she'd made concessions to a gentler horse than River, who was enjoying semi-retirement. "The bad news is, the railroad's coming through. They've got congressional approval for a route that cuts right across the edge of Comanche hunting grounds and within 2 miles of Willow Creek." Red Moon's face remained impassive, but Eliza saw his hand tighten on his walking stick. The good news, Cord continued, is that they're required to negotiate fair passage, and because of the legal precedent set by your compact, the Comanche band has recognized standing to negotiate directly. No Bureau of Indian Affairs middlemen.
What's that mean in plain English? Jake asked.
Little Star answered, It means we can demand true compensation, not worthless paper promises, but real guarantees protected access to water, jobs for our young men on the railroad crews, shares in the freight profits from cattle shipped through our territory. They'll never agree to that. Thomas said, They will, Marshal Cord said with quiet confidence, because the alternative is years of legal battles, potential violence, and congressional inquiry into their past activities. Pike Mallory's testimony about bribes and intimidation is still on record. The railroad wants to move forward, not backward.
And if we refuse entirely?
Red Moon asked in his careful English. Then they'll likely try to go around, adding 50 miles and millions in costs. But, Cord hesitated. There are those in Washington who'd use refusal as an excuse to void all agreements and remove your people by force. I wouldn't recommend testing them. The porch fell silent. Eliza could hear Emma's laughter from the yard where she was now playing with the ranch dogs. This was the world they were trying to build for her, one where different peoples could live side by side, where her best friend could be a Comanche boy without anyone thinking it strange. Would the railroad destroy that? We need time to discuss, Thomas said finally. You have 2 months before the railroad representatives arrive. I'd suggest using that time to get your terms in order, and hire a good lawyer. I can recommend several who aren't in the railroad's pocket. After Cord left, they sat in council, a practice that had become routine over the years. Maria brought coffee and the fry bread she'd learned to make from Morning Song before the old woman passed. They talked through options, possibilities, fears. The world is changing whether we wish it or not, Red Moon said finally. The question is, do we shape that change or let it shape us? We shape it, Eliza said firmly, just like we've shaped everything else these past 5 years. Little Star smiled. Spoken like a true warrior. Very well. We make the railroad serve our purposes, not the other way around. They spent the next weeks preparing. Letters went back and forth to Austin and Washington. The territorial governor himself came to visit, curious about this experiment in cooperation that had the whole West watching. Even newspapers from back east sent reporters to write about the miracle at Willow Creek. The day the railroad negotiators arrived, they found something unexpected. Instead of a divided community they could exploit, they faced a united front. Ranchers and Comanches sat together at the negotiating table. The school children sang America in English and Comanche. The local judge Thornton had retired and been replaced by the younger, more progressive James Whitman made clear that any agreement would be enforced to the letter. It took 3 days of hard negotiation, but in the end, they had something unprecedented, a railroad agreement that benefited everyone. The Comanche would receive payments for right-of-way, jobs for their young people, and guaranteed water access in perpetuity. The ranchers got a shipping point for their cattle without losing grazing land. The railroad got their route with the promise of peace and even assistance from people who knew every hill and valley along the way. You know what this means, Thomas asked Eliza that night as they walked along Willow Creek, watching the sunset paint the water gold. That we'll have train whistles disturbing our sleep within a year. He laughed, pulling her close. That too, but I meant, this proves it can work. Not just here, but anywhere people are willing to try. We've shown there's another way forward. One small step at a time. Eliza agreed, resting her hand on her growing belly. Though I wonder what kind of world this little one will inherit. A better one than we did, I hope. One where Emma can grow up to run a ranch or a railroad if she wants. One where Swifthawk can be both Comanche and American without choosing sides. One where courage creates bridges instead of walls. As they walked back to the house, Eliza thought about that morning 5 years ago when she'd ridden into a buffalo stampede to save a frightened boy. Such a small action in the grand scheme of things. Yet it had changed everything, opened hearts, challenged assumptions, created possibilities no one had imagined. The old wooden horse morning song had given her sat on the mantel in their home, a reminder that every life saved made the world larger. Looking at her family gathered for dinner, Thomas and Caleb, Emma playing under the table, Maria bustling about, even little Star joining them to discuss the next day's cattle drive. She knew it was true. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the darkening prairie. But now there were other sounds, 2 children laughing in 2 languages, the evening bell from the schoolhouse, the quiet conversation of Comanche and Anglo night herders sharing watch, the sounds of a future being built one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. As her father had always said, courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was action in spite of it. And here, in this unlikely corner of Texas, they'd proven that such action could change the world. Eliza touched the wooden horse one more time, a gesture of gratitude to the grandmother who'd seen hope in the midst of sorrow. Then she went to help with dinner, content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and they would meet them as they always had together. In this land where the wind blows fierce, she murmured, remembering the words she'd written in the first entry of the Willow Creek Journal. Courage knows no color, love knows no borders, and honor is the only law that matters when the dust finally settles. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of courage and hope from the American frontier. Please leave a comment below to let me know what country or state you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of the Old West. And share your thoughts about Eliza and Thomas's journey in the comments. What part of their story touched you the most? Until next time, keep riding toward the horizon.